Just a useful reminder for anybody who is joining us for the first time. I think most people whom I've seen have been here before, but the format of the evening is very simple. We start now. We'll have a sitting. We'll also do a bit of chanting and bowing, which is optional. Then we'll have some reflections, and then we'll share the reflections. I think it's important to remind ourselves at the beginning of a session such as this, why we're here. We can ask ourselves that question, why am I here? Because it's not just a social gathering to entertain, it's an opportunity to meet others. So in that sense, it's social. But it's really fundamentally at the heart of it an inquiry into our life, into existence, into the meaning of life, our sense of purpose, what are we doing, why are we doing it? And I'd like to really stress this core theme at the heart of Buddhist practice, which is inquiry, referred to usually as investigation, which means putting a question mark over our assumptions about ourselves, about life, about our likes and dislikes. And there is actually a blessing in this pandemic. It's not a very nice one in many cases when life is threatened and loved ones are threatened. But it's when we're under threat that we start asking questions. We start noticing how we react to threat. And we realize how fragile this whole infrastructure is that we surround ourselves in daily life. When we're accustomed to having certain patterns of behavior, our habits, the people we surround ourselves with, they may be better or worse, but it's usually familiar and has been for many years very stable. But this last year has highlighted how fragile that whole infrastructure of our lives is. And it's only, sadly, it's only when we're under threat of some kind that we start asking these sort of deeper questions. Otherwise, we're just happy to sort of coast along and just let things happen and just not question things too much. So what we know was referred to or is referred to as the heavenly messages, old age, sickness and death, remind us that there is this constant threat to our existence. And that's an opportunity for us to investigate what are the things that I hold on to, what are the things that mean so much to me that when they're taken away, I feel bereft and lost. And who is it that's feeling bereft or lost? So it's really a question into our sense of identity, our sense of being. And that's what we're doing here this evening. So we're coming together as a group of fellow practitioners. Some of us know each other, some only through Zoom, others in person. And hopefully there'll be a time when we will be able to meet up in person and sit together in the same room and reflect together. I would also like to stress that the reflections that are offered from this seat by me and others are really personal reflections as to how we have been impacted by the teachings, by our exposure to Dhamma. And essentially, even though I may be speaking a lot this evening, I'd really like you to use this as an opportunity for your own inquiry. So there is a sort of silent dialogue going on. So when I say something, it's not just to be accepted blindly or on trust. It's to be considered and reflected on, for yourselves. Do I agree with that? Why is it saying it that way? Does it, if that happens, why does that necessarily follow into something else? So it's an active, engaged, silent dialogue. And it's similar to the dialogue that we can have within ourselves. If we have a fixed opinion or a view or suddenly hear ourselves making a strong statement, we can stop and pause and say, wow, where did that come from? Which part of me is having that expression, that point of view, that feeling? So not only are we having a dialogue between ourselves in terms of me raising topics or themes or thoughts which can trigger a thought in response, it's also a question of one's own inner dialogue that we should really keep active during our daily life as we go about our business. So I offer those introductory sort of pointers really as to how best to participate in events such as this. It puts us into a sort of a reflective frame of mind while still being engaged in a shared process. I think the other nice thing to know is that one is with like-minded people. There will be obviously lots of different individual characteristics, but we're all engaged in a similar quest. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be here at this meeting. And that creates a spirit of connection. We're forming for this evening, for the next hour and a half or a little bit less, a sense of community. And when we do open up to points of view, to questions or to thoughts that you might have, really do feel free to share your perspective, because this is a communal process. And it's good to remember that when we do ask a question, it's often a question that is mirrored and echoed in somebody else in the same space. So I'd just say another thing, I think, which is useful to remember. You know, Buddhism becomes a thing. It becomes a sort of, sometimes a bit of a monolith. Masses of books, masses of teachings, labels are attached to people, to conditions, to states of mind. Labels are attached to someone who's a Buddhist or not a Buddhist. And I think it's really helpful to step back from all those different frames of reference and just realize this is about reality. This is about the immediate experience of life and what it might mean to us. So the label, whether one is a Buddhist or not a Buddhist, doesn't really matter. What matters is, are we waking up to what we're really experiencing? Are we really seeing the nature of reality as it is? Or are we caught up in a delusion or a fantasy? Have we created a perception that is somehow out of kilter, out of line with the way things are? And so we're really engaging in a universal quest of inquiry. You could say that all of existence in one form or another is seeking meaning, seeking fulfillment. And as human beings, we have the opportunity to find meaning on a level that no other creature that we know on this planet can do. There are many conscious beings on this planet, and obviously our nearest mammal relatives have consciousness. We can even communicate with them non-verbally in many cases. But we have this reflexive quality, which we don't think that even the highest mammals have, although they may be close to it. But we can articulate our thoughts. We can be aware of being aware in a way that probably other mammals are unable to. So that gives us a unique opportunity to carry an investigation through to fulfillment. And that's in a sense exemplified by an awakened being, a human being who evolves out of this mess of biology mixed with geology and all the physical phenomena of this organic planet. We become a human being and we have this ability to be aware of being aware, a conscious manifestation of organic life. So in that sense, even though there's sort of, how many, it is 6 or 9 billion of us on this planet, we are really quite uniquely positioned as individuals to tap into a truth which is a universal truth. And we find this truth not in some abstract theory or book. We find this truth in ourselves, in our heart. And that's why shining this light of awareness that we have internally into our inner life allows us to experience the fullness of life, both the tragedies and the beauty and the horrors, and actually come to a position that allows us to see into the very, very nature of reality, which is apparent here and now, in the present moment. And it's, as long as we're alive and in the present moment, we're just a hair's breadth away from the truth of how things are. So as is our custom, we will have a few moments of chanting. We'll chant the dedication of offerings. We will chant the three refuges and the 5 precepts, just as a reminder of that aspect of our humanness, of our humanity, which relies on a tidy life. By tidy life, I mean a life which is as harmonious, as full of goodwill, and avoidance of unskillful states of mind, which lead to confusion and suffering, as we can witness in the news and in our lives, even personal lives and life around us. And then we'll have a period of sitting. So if you have a shrine and you want to light a candle or something, or turn to it, feel free to do so. I will turn to my shrine behind me. And I think I'll say a little bit about the shrine. You know, the shrine is a symbol, and it really represents some of the sort of aspects of this path of inquiry, which is worth reflecting on. You know, the symbol of the Buddha represents enlightenment. So we're not worshipping a stone idol here, or if it happened to be a golden idol, it wouldn't be a golden idol either. One is really surrendering to a dimension of experience which basically we as individuals can surrender into a greater sense of unity and oneness and wisdom and compassion. So on one level, it's an acknowledgement of our limitations in terms of a personality view, with all the forces that we suffer towards unwholesome states of mind. So it's surrendering to something which is uplifting and which is realizable and which is potentially just waiting to wake up in each one of us. The candles represent the light and the truth of light, and the little leaves, in this case, I haven't got any flowers, represent the transient nature of life in general. So there's an element of one of the 3 characteristics of existence, which is impermanence. So I will light the candle, and you're very welcome to join me in your own homes, and then we'll chant the dedication of offerings. If you wish, you can we can dedicate this evening's practice to someone dear to you. It can be to the whole planet, which is in need of a lot of care and concern. It can be to an individual or a family or a specific set of circumstances, just to sort of make it a shared experience, that it's not just about oneself, it's about people who are significant or creatures that are significant in one's life. So if we turn to page 18, which I see Wendy has already done. Thank you, Wendy. So we'll do the dedication of offerings. Yo so bhagava araham samma sambuddho swakato yena bhagavata dhammo Supatipanno yasa bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho tamayam bhagavantam sadamam sasangham imehi sakare hiyataraham aropitehi abhipujayama Saruno bante bhagava suchiraparini bhutopi pachima janatanukampamanasa Ime sakare dugata panna kara bhute patiganhatu amha kambi garatam hitaya sukaya araham samma sambuddho bhagava buddham bhagavantam abhivademi. Swakato bhagavata dhammo dhammam namasami supatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho sangham namami. We'll just go to page 128, which is taking the three refuges. And again, Wangdu has kindly put that up on the screen share. And we'll start with the Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. And then we'll go straight into the Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. Sangham Saranam Gacchami. And we'll chant it in English as well, or state it in English. To the Buddha, I go for refuge. To the Dhamma, I go for refuge. To the Sangha, I go for refuge. Dutiyampi Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. Dutiyampi Sangham Saranam Gacchami. For the second time, to the Buddha, I go for refuge. For the second time, to the Dhamma, I go for refuge. For the second time, to the Sangha, I go for refuge. Tatiyampi Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. Tatiyampi Sangham Saranam Gacchami. For the third time, to the Buddha, I go for refuge. For the third time, to the Sangha, to the Dhamma, I go for refuge. For the third time, to the Sangha, I go for refuge. And then we'll move to the 5 precepts, which we'll chant both in Pali and then repeat in English. Panatipata verimani sikhapadam samadhyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature. Adinadana verimani sikhapadam samadhyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given. Kamesu mechachara verimani sikhapadam samadhyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct. Musavada verimani sikhapadam samadhyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from lying. Surameraya majja pamadatana verimani sikhapadam samadhyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness. Imani pancha sikhapadani silena sugatim yanti, silena bhogasampada, silena niputim yanti, tasma silam visodaye. These are the 5 precepts. Virtue is the source of happiness. Virtue is a source of true wealth. Virtue is a source of peacefulness. Therefore, let virtue be purified. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll just bow 3 times. Thank you, I can do that. So we make ourselves comfortable for what we can call a formal sitting. It's basically creating conditions which are conducive to minimizing sense stimulation from outside and allowing ourselves to explore the inner experience of the body, the sensations that arise in the body and the quality of those sensations, an opportunity to observe the thoughts and feelings that come to mind, an ability to observe the complex narratives that our brain generates, and to actually have an awareness of how we're feeling generally. So it's like a sort of a scan, really, of all the different aspects of being a human being. And the key element is just saying how it is, seeing how it is, not how we want it to be. So we're not aspiring to something beyond us. It's just the immediacy of the moment, the immediacy of our experience that is just like this. This is how it feels right now. So what we're doing in our formal practice is just observing how difficult it can be sometimes just to come and be present, just to basically stay with what is as opposed to what could be or what has been. And of course our body is this wonderful vehicle which, although it gives us a lot of suffering, also places us very squarely in the here and now if we open up to what we experience. So we're opening up to inner dimension of experience. So we take an in breath and an out breath, which will happen quite naturally. And we don't want any bells and whistles. We just want the simplicity, the ordinariness of this moment, as it is for each of us individually right now. Each one of us will have had the day that we've had. We have our individual characteristics, preoccupations, worries. So we acknowledge them all without getting lost in them, hopefully. We can have the eyes partially open or closed. And there are a few things that we do need to do to get the maximum benefit from this quiet time. And that's making sure that our posture is an upright one. It does make a difference. In maintaining our posture, we're actually maintaining attention, being aware of how we are sitting. So we're bringing awareness or mindfulness to the way we sit. And we can observe how we feel depending on how we sit. We don't want to be forced ramrod military style upright. But we do want the spine to be straight, as is comfortable. The head slightly chin tucked in, just so that the back of the spine has that sense of connection through the back of the head. And then we can feel a connection with the heavens, with the sky. And going downwards, we can notice when we sit upright how the weight is transferred onto our hips and to our sitting bone, whether we're sitting in a chair or on a cushion. That will also affect how we experience our legs and feet. And we can observe how the body breathes almost as if automatically. Natural inhalation followed by a natural exhalation. And noticing what our minds get up to. And breathing in, breathing out, letting go of whatever the mind's holding on to. So we don't deny what we experience, but we don't hold on to what we're experiencing. What we do try and do is notice that we are noticing, that we're paying attention, being aware of what is being experienced. It's simple, immediate, and directly true. Each one of us, whatever we're experiencing, can honestly and clearly say that right now, for me, it's just like this. And we surrender to that. Just like this. So we notice the silence in between the words. Notice the effect that has on our experience. Noticing perhaps an impulse to want to do something or think something or say something to oneself. So even in silence, there is generally some mental or other taking place. So we just come back to the stillness and the silence again and again and again and again. And like can we do that? Because the silence and the stillness is always present. Behind all the activity of phenomena, behind the flow of feelings in the body, behind the flow of thoughts and narratives, there is stillness and silence. We're not looking for it because it's there already. And how do we know it's there? By being aware of it, noticing it, being present to it. Just being present to the experience of here and now. We can keep our attention on just one part of the body, perhaps the nostrils, just the flow of air on the in-breath and exiting on the exhalation. We could choose the heart region, noticing the flow of air through the heart region with the in-breath and the out-breath. We can notice the solar plexus and the stomach and belly area. And if our diaphragm is moving up and down with each in-breath and out-breath, we may notice the stomach expand and contract ever so gently. So we can experience diaphragmatic breathing, which is deeply, deeply relaxing for the mind-body organism. Or we can be aware of the whole body breathing, almost imagining the whole body expanding ever so slightly with the in-breath and contracting ever so slightly with the exhalation. Noticing the feet and the toes, soles of the feet. Noticing the hands and the fingers on the hands. On the palms. In between the fingers. We can notice how the skin feels on our face. Perhaps a gentle movement of air brushing against it. Noticing the skin on our forehead and temples. Noticing how relaxed or not we are around the eyes. And the mouth and the jaw. We may notice how our ears feel on the outside, on the inside. The tingling of the roots of the hair. All the while breathing in and breathing out. sitting, breathing, observing, witnessing. Sitting, breathing, observing, and witnessing. Sitting, breathing, observing, and witnessing. sitting and breathing, and noticing the joints in the body, the muscles of the body, any little tensions that might be arising. And if we do notice any, we breathe into them and relax into them on the out breath. Relaxing into any discomfort can often dissipate the discomfort, change our relationship to the discomfort. It's like an exercise of walking into our suffering. Instead of avoiding it, we walk into it and dispel it by surrendering and accepting it. Changing our relationship to what we try and avoid. So as we open our eyes, we allow the light to show the colors and textures of the room we're in, or the space we're in. Allows us to observe all the objects in the space and the space in which the objects stand or exist. Whether our meditation was troubled and disturbed by a lot of thoughts, a lot of activity. In most cases, even when we come out of the formal, quiet, closed eyes sitting, there's a sense of somewhere a bit more peace, a bit more quiet, a bit more presence. I think it's helpful to remember that we're not looking for peace. We're allowing it to, as it were, manifest as our mind, mental activity and emotional activity subsides. So there's a greater sense of spaciousness, of presence. So, having concluded the formal sitting, we can stretch our legs if we need to. Stroke our painful joint if we have one. Give it a bit of metta. And we can feel grateful that we have this opportunity to just sit quietly for half an hour. The occasional half-hour sit can make all the difference to a day, to a week. It can make all the difference to a situation, perhaps at home or in relationship. What our sitting practice can highlight for us is how dependent we are on a lot of the noise that goes on in our lives. So even in just sitting for half an hour, we're actually letting go of the familiar background, whether it be the radio or the background dialogue that goes on in our head, the commentary on life, on people, on politics. The current conditions we're experiencing in this country and abroad. If we get caught up in the dramas that we hear on the news, on the radio, on the television, it can be very distressing and upsetting. So we have options, we have choices. Although the experience that we have of phenomena is the conditions that generate and create the conditions we find ourselves in. What we do with those conditions is where we have some power. We may not be able to change the conditions, but we can work on how we relate to those conditions, how we experience them, the nature of the relationship that we have with those conditions. think it's important to remember that we have something called right effort, which is one limb of the Eightfold Noble Path. It's actually where we have our power. It has to be developed. But sometimes it's easy to misunderstand the injunctions of meditation about being present to whatever arises. It's very easy in times like this, for very negative patterns of thought to arise. Where we feel helpless, not in control, the victim of circumstances. We might feel trapped and helpless and not being able to be with the people we'd like to be with. Well, we can observe how our minds can develop that theme. And there are several ways we can deal with that. One way, which I'll share with you, which is a way that is open to all of us all, is to have a dialogue with that perspective, with that part of us that is feeling depressed or helpless. We can come from an external, objective position and say to that part, you don't have to feel like this. It's not necessary to feel this way. Because it isn't. The conditions are arising and we can be a victim of those conditions, or we can address those conditions. And we can actually tell that part, look, I'm not buying into your story. I'm not going to feel depressed. I'm going to do something positive and actually enjoy the fact that I am as well as I am. Enjoy what food I have to eat. Enjoy the fact that I'm living here and now. I'm not going to go down that route that you want me to. We can develop our own dialogue with it, but one which comes from a position of wisdom, understanding, and what is good for one, not buying into the narrative. This is called right effort. It's not allowing negative thoughts, unwholesome states of mind to arise. That's actually determination. It's an action. It's an act. It's an empowerment. There's no denying of how one is feeling. It's just not accepting the parameters in what one is feeling and how one is feeling it. It can be a bit tricky to master initially, but then it's just like exercising a muscle, a capacity that we have. So we try and prevent the arising of these unhelpful states of mind by objectifying them, by addressing them as a state of mind, not as a fixed given. There's no absolute reality in that, because the key characteristic of all phenomena, emotional and physical, is its transience. It doesn't have to stay. It's not going to be there forever. So we facilitate its exit by just making a conscious, internal verbal position of saying, sorry, I'm not going to go with this line of thinking, this line of feeling. I know I'm feeling it, but I'm not going to encourage it. Don't go there. There's no need. So that's one half of right effort. The other half is cultivating a positive state of mind. So the choice of what we read, what we expose ourselves to, makes a tremendous difference. I remember many years ago coming across a little series of booklets, and the theme of them was loving acts of kindness. And it was so nice to read those stories. People had contributed their little narratives of how they had been on the receiving end of an act of kindness from a stranger on a bus, in the street. A whole set of situations and circumstances, descriptions of loving act of kindness. Some of the stories were very, very moving and uplifting, and had a profound effect on how the mind felt, how the heart felt, how one was feeling in oneself. So I remember I had 3 of these little booklets on my bedside table, and at times when perhaps life was challenging, either at work or in life generally, in the evening before going to bed, I just read a few of these stories and just allow myself to experience the innate goodness that people can have and how that can manifest. And reading about it was very uplifting and an encouragement to actually, if the situation arose, enact an act of kindness towards somebody else. And even if there's nobody to enact it, one can do it to one's environment. I have a habit which my dear partner finds amusing. She's got used to it now. If I see a bit of rubbish in the street, I often pick it up and just throw it in a bin. I don't do it to get patted on the back. I don't get a civil medal of honor or anything. It's just my contribution to the environment, to the area I happen to be in. I consider that an act of kindness to the rubbish that we're dumping on this poor planet of ours. An actual act. But if one has an opportunity to help an elderly neighbor, perhaps give them a call or speak to them over the fence if you're socially distancing. Those are little act of kindness, those ordinary conversations can mean so much to someone who's lonely and alone, perhaps feeling vulnerable. We can actually practice acts of kindness in our own immediate environment, on the most basic level of treating the environment we're in with respect, keeping it tidy. Keeping one's space tidy actually does affect how we feel internally, because the environment we live in is often a reflection of our emotional state of mind. It can be taken to extreme, of course. We have a condition called OCD, which is essentially a very extreme manifestation of keeping an environment tidy so that we feel tidy inside ourselves. So that's a very, very, very basic one. Tidying up after oneself is another one. Whether it be washing the dishes, keeping the kitchen clean. Those are actually acts of kindness, not only to the environment, but to the inner space that we all have within us. And then there's a more challenging area, of course, of the relationships we have with people. The familiarity of people that we live with can often undermine any acts of kindness. We start taking people and their experiences for granted. We have this capacity of adapting to the situations we find ourselves in and the people we live with. That's why so often we as it were, ignore the sensibilities of people who are close to us because we just take them for granted. So showing acts of respect, of kindness to people that we live with can take many, many forms. The dynamics, of course, that develop between people can be very complex and can be often quite negative. So it's the same sort of injunction that appears in many spiritual teachings, do unto others as you'd like to have done to yourself. There's such a deep truth in that statement, whether the Buddha said it, which he did, or Jesus said it, which he did, or Muhammad. Praise be the Prophet, praise be Allah, he said it as well. These are universal truths, they don't belong to anybody. But the way we treat others is ideally how we would like to be treated ourselves. What that does, it takes us from a position of self-centeredness, where we're the center of the universe, and allows us to acknowledge how other people are feeling. So we actually transcend our egotistical, self-centered perspectives and narratives. So it's worth reflecting on how we treat those whom we live with or we're close to. And what does that tap into straight away? The 5 precepts, of course, as well as the Eightfold Noble Path. Right action, right speech. Am I actually being respectful and thoughtful of another person's perspective? Can I agree with another perspective, even though it's not mine and I don't agree with it? Can I accept the fact that someone has a different perspective and avoid the sort of manifestation of willfulness that we witnessed in Washington last week, or whatever it was, the 6th, I think, of January. Strong feelings of grievance which manifest as violence and are totally disrespectful. And actually understanding where that disrespect comes from a sense of being ignored, perhaps, a sense of powerlessness. Most people act unskillfully for some very good reasons. It's not a justification, but it does help explain. When we have understanding, we can deal with it much more skillfully than just being reactive to it. So we have plenty of opportunity, each one of us in our lives, to be kinder and more respectful. And that leads to a greater sense of harmony. And that's essentially what our lives can be, if we choose to, a bit more harmonious. So we feel less guilty, don't have pangs of conscience about how badly we may have treated somebody or taken something that didn't belong to us. And that creates a much better foundation for this sort of introspective journey of inquiry, which allows us to see things more objectively, more openly, which is this path of investigation where we develop contextual understanding, which effectively is wisdom. And we all have that potential. So those are a few reflections which have sort of arisen spontaneously in the context of our meeting this evening. I'd like to invite anybody who'd like to say anything in response. So if you'd like to unmute yourself when you speak, otherwise keep yourself muted, but if you wish to say something, please unmute yourself one at a time. and share whatever you'd like to share. If you prefer to sit in silence, then do sit in silence. There's no injunction to do either. We're free to do either sit in silence or share a reflection, or perhaps even ask a question, and we'll see what comes out as an answer. So I don't know if we're in gallery view or if we can go into gallery view. Yeah, we can.
Hello, Nick.
Hello, I'm not sure who I'm saying hello to, but...
John Handley.
Oh, John. Hi, John.
Hi, Nick. It seems to me that in these particularly difficult times, the importance of developing right view becomes even more pertinent to our lives. And I wonder how we can really start on the path to developing the right view of what this pandemic actually means. It strikes me that you mentioned that one of the things we may do is choose what we expose ourselves to in terms of the news, for example, every day, which seems to get worse. My own reaction to that has been to not watch the news now. But I actually wonder whether that is the right view, because it strikes me that it might be more pertinent to actually embrace the situation rather than reject it and feel completely separate from it. I don't know whether that offers any reflections at all.
Yeah, sure. That's a very good point. I think we have to be the best judge for ourselves as to what suits us best. I think we have to strike the right balance between deciding what we expose ourselves to and what effect it has on us and what we don't. We have a choice. And I think one has to look at the intention behind one's decision to either watch or not watch the news. One can watch the news out of just sheer boredom and repetitiveness, that one just happens to be sitting in front of the television and getting another dose of the negativity that you just referred to. And we have an option of noticing what effect that has on us. Is it actually informing us in any way that we need to be informed? Or one can decide, if one is feeling fragile and vulnerable and overloaded with the negativity of the situation, decide, well, actually, I don't need this at the moment. It's not going to inform me in any deeper sense, even on the information level, perhaps, than I need to be informed. But what we're cultivating is an awareness which allows us to become our own, as it were, guides, carers, teachers. And I think it's important to know that we have a choice. So the injunction might be, protect yourself. But how you protect yourself, well, that's an individual decision which can be done with an assessment of some kind. What effect is it having on me? Because watching the news, again, one can choose what time one watches the news. Do I need to watch the news at 10 o'clock in the evening before I go to bed? Or can I wait till the morning? Is it going to change very much? Well, the effect it'll have will be different in the morning or in the evening. But you are touching on an interesting point, because the principle, if there is one, is to embrace and accept everything. But we have to regulate how we're able to handle what we open ourselves up to. As T.S. Eliot said, humankind cannot bear very much reality. Well, there's a profound truth there. And in a sense, what we're doing in our Buddhist practice is a sort of developmental path. We're exposing ourselves to increasing doses of reality, essentially. It's a process of disillusionment where we question assumptions, but we have to do it at a pace that we can manage. And how we do that, that would be our individual decision. So I hope that addresses a very good question, and it's worth reflecting on. We have to take individual responsibility for it.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. But thank you. It's a very good question, very helpful.
Hello, Nick. It's Mark Pierce here. Can I ask? Hi. Thank you so much for your reflections again. They're really, as ever, really stimulating. I came to Buddhism about 6 or 7 years ago, and there are some days that I think I've got this thing cracked. I'm a pretty good A+ student of this old Buddhism thing, and then other days, when I look into my journal of reflections, I see myself making the same mistakes, making the same errors that I've done repeatedly. I'm logging the same. So what is it that I'm learning? And I'm wondering whether you've got any sort of comments or perhaps tips about how we can maybe steer at more of a middle way between those experiences of almost elation and despair, something a little bit more balanced, perhaps.
Right. Okay, well, I think you're doing it. It's happening to you. You're noticing the ups and downs. The ups and downs, nature at work. We go through periods of exhilaration and sense of connection and unity and sort of, as you say, feel we've cracked it. And then it all falls apart. And that's the nature of emotions. I was talking to a friend today and sharing, the sort of waves of often despair that I experience and how it takes a while to sort of get the measure of it and learn through experience that actually this is natural for emotions to go into dark places. The question is, do we believe those dark places? Do we accept it as some kind of absolute or final reality? Because then, as you say yourself, suddenly the weather changes, emotional weather, and suddenly it's okay again. And we try to hold on to that. But what's the important thing to recognize is that there is an awareness of both the up and the down. And the answer is in the awareness and not in the up and the down. Yeah. But it takes a while to sort of tease that apart and to see that it's natural for emotional phenomena to flower very beautifully at times and sometimes absolutely catastrophically. And it's our attachment or aversion that locks those states of mind into sort of place, as it were, and we suffer terribly as a result. So our practice when we sit in meditation is to experience the ups and the downs, the moments of clarity and well-being, and then the feelings of awfulness, and see how we buy into the narrative. I'm failing, I should be doing better, this isn't good enough, this is absolutely terrible, why am I doing this? To those other moments when, oh, it's fantastic, I've got it taped, I know exactly what's going on, and this is fantastic, this is amazing. Yeah. Well, it's human. It's natural to do that.
Yes, yes.
But the point of the teachings is to go into the witnessing of it, which is basically what mindfulness practice is. Right, so right now it's like this. And the question is, can I accept this as it is? Well, the best way to accept it is to practice it, to actually get to the knowing that this is like this, as opposed to being just trapped in it's like this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does indeed.
Yeah, yeah. So in a sense, you're doing that already. You're recognizing the ups and the downs, and you've got a record of it, which is why it can be so helpful to have a journal, because you have a document there saying, this is how I was on such and such a day. And my gosh, that happened again then. But then in between, this is what happened. Right, what can I learn from it? Well, even the witnesser at that point, you're in the witnessing position, recognizing something. Can that be, as it were, internalized and transmuted into wisdom? And right, okay, so that's what happens when I'm in a negative state. This is what happens when I'm in a positive state. And it's a constant journey of inquiry. And where is that inquiry happening? It's always, always, without exception, in the here and in the now. That's the beauty. That's the beauty of that constant, repetitive reminder. It's always here and now. Our nibbana, yes, or nirvana, whichever word you like to use, is here in samsara. That's the paradox. Because the way we perceive reality is informed by the wisdom, the insight that informs our perception. yeah, our understanding. And it's available here and now. It's as it says in the chanting book, it's apparent here and now to be experienced individually by the wise. And we're all engaged in that inquiry, in that journey, into waking up to the fullness of the here and now. And how we do that is our challenge, our task. And the guiding principles are essentially in the Eightfold Noble Path, a beautiful summary of the whole spectrum of human existence, starting with, as you were saying, with the right view, or as I said earlier on, because the view that we have informs how we experience everything, how we experience right speech, how we experience right action, how we experience right livelihood. It's all informed by the view that we have of it. And of course, if our view is clouded and constrained and limited, we see things clouded and constrained and limited. It's a beautiful psychological description of the human being, you know, and what we need to work. And to think that that was sort of, as it were, conceptualized and put together as an offering, you know, 2,564 years ago, when we were sort of savages around in the Iron Age, it's quite extraordinary, without any recourse to some savior or some higher power. It's all in us, right here, right now.
Thank you.
So what our formal sitting practice allows us to do is to switch off from thinking. Yes, because all our suffering actually is contained in thought. And thought is always one removed from reality. It's always representational. It's never the thing itself. So although thought can be incredibly helpful, it's also incredibly deceptive. So what we do when we sit formally is we go into the experiential aspect of being, literally, in the here and now. We often hear this very powerful word, the practice of bare attention. Bare attention, no bells or whistles or things about anything. It's just the immediacy of the experience. And in that immediacy of the experience, we're actually on the absolute interface between consciousness and phenomena. And our thinking about it, although helpful in some respects, also prevents us being in the immediacy of the moment, which is why peak experiences happen when we forget about thought, when we get so absorbed in what we're experiencing that the absence of self suddenly reveals the beauty of a sunset, or the beauty of a flower, or the beauty of an insect, or a beauty of a drop of rain on the window pane. Or music can do that, where we're suddenly uplifted out of our preoccupations, of our sense of I, me, and mine, and he said, she said, and all that stuff that goes on all the time, this endless inner narrative, not only external narrative. And that's what the Buddha was pointing to, the freedom of not self, and having insight into what we call the self, the likes and the dislikes. It's just amazing. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. And it's a potential that we can all wake up to. And in fact, may all beings wake up to it, because this planet would be a different place if we woke up to this. But we can do it in our own hearts, in our own lives, and basically allow that to be shared with whoever comes into our orbit.
Nick, hi.
Yes?
I just had a very small reflection on your discussion of our surroundings and keeping things tidy or clean, but also how the practice of getting them that way is so beneficial, and the act of doing the cleaning and keeping the tidying, and that is a very helpful practice as well as the sort of state that things remain in, the sort of more passive state that they have around you.
Mm-hmm. Can you say a bit more?
I think in terms of taking your, as you are doing, as you are doing that activity, how that helps to, in a way, touching on what you were just saying, to take you away, to absorb you completely in another thing.
Well, you see, this absorption in something else, we have to be selective as to what we absorb ourselves in. We could absorb ourselves in an intoxicated state of mind and forget ourselves, which is why people do just that, take intoxicants and drugs to as it were, lose themselves into something else. That's not very skillful. But I think the beauty of just being involved in the simplicity of everyday life is that it actually is another form of meditation. It puts us into immediate contact with our physical environment so immediately. And that's why there's so much stress on chores in monasteries, whether it be sweeping the endless flow of leaves that keep on streaming from the trees in a tropical forest, which is what happens in monasteries in Thailand, or whether it's sweeping the autumn leaves up out of your garden, which seem to be endlessly as it were, re-emerging or reappearing. You sweep the path, and then next day the wind blows and another lot of leaves comes down. But what happens in that act of full attention in the moment? There is a suspension of self if we're fully absorbed in our action. But it doesn't mean we're unaware. Being absorbed does not mean unaware. What we're less aware of is our self-centered, quote unquote, preoccupations around the sense of, for instance, oh, I'm doing this and I'm a good person for doing it, some kind of sort of self-praise. We're doing it because it needs doing. And what we have the potential to do is just to do things from our intuitive sense of what's right or wrong, where we have this fallback or this reflective place where thought can come in and offer a different perspective, but it's just an assistant. It's not the primary decider. Thought is not the primary decider. The primary decider is our intuitive sense of what's right or wrong. And it takes a while to sort of learn how to listen to this inner voice of wisdom, if we want to call it that. But it doesn't mean abandoning thought. Quite the opposite. Thought can be incredibly helpful, as long as we don't believe it as being an absolute truth, because thought can come up with 1,000 combinations, different variations on a theme. But we have to find the one that is appropriate fully in the moment. So our practice in suspending thought allows us to get into touch with this deeper flowing process of feelings, of emotions, of somatic experiences, which, as it were, if allowed to, as it were, purify themselves just by the act of being allowed to function without too much interference in a contained way, helped by and contained by the precepts. And out of that emerges a sort of, right, this is what needs to be done. And it's a cumulative process, which is why the path in some ways is a gradual path of personal development and personal evolution. I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope it goes some way to doing so. I'm aware of time, and I notice that some people are leaving the meeting, probably have a prior appointment or a dinner date, perhaps, in a bubble, who knows. So what I'd like to suggest is that we end our session with a short chant, and then we'll perhaps ask Wendy, who's managing the screen, so we can stay on a little bit longer if we want to carry on a little bit more informally. So what I suggest we do is we go to the reflections on universal well-being. It's a nice simple chant. It's on page 41. If you have, I think it's page 41. I'll just check. 41, yeah. This is a chant that can be chanted by anybody, because it is literally about universal well-being, whether one's a Buddhist, a Christian, a Muslim, a Sufi, whatever religion, Taoist, it applies. So we'll all be muted and I'll just chant this and you're very welcome to join in. Now let us chant the reflections on universal well-being. May I abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may I maintain well-being in myself. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts they will be the heirs. Right, we'll just chant the closing homage, which is on 28. If you have a shrine or special area in your room you'd like to bow to. Arahant Samma Sambho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Thank you, Wendy. So that brings our evening formally or officially to an end. You're very welcome to stay on for a little bit longer if you'd like to. I'd like to thank you all for joining. I wish you all well, health, well-being, happiness on every level, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And next week, Martin will be leading the class. And I think for the next few weeks, generally speaking, we'll be alternating. But I'd like to say goodbye and wish you all well, those who are going to leave, and those who'd like to stay, please feel free to do so for a bit.